In 150 years of the Co-operative in Plymouth, much has changed. To our founder, Charles Goodenough, today's city and surrounds would bear little resemblance to life in the 1850s. But some things have stayed the same. The values and principles of the cooperative movement on which the society was founded hold true today.
I'm a member of the cooperative
because of the fair trade and the ethical policies and what they stand for.
Because of the work they put back into the community.
Because I love the dividend.
Because of its values and principles.
Because of our ethical values.
Because I like to feel part of a community.
Because of the member benefits and the offers.
Because I strongly believe in the ethics of the cooperative group.
Because of all the rewards I get.
Because we do a lot of help within the community.
Because the values that were held 150 years ago are still the same today.
"150 years ago, it was a difficult time for most industrial cities. There was a lot of poverty. People were being sold adulterated food mixed with all sorts of poisonous chemicals just to bulk them up. The food was overpriced, and Plymouth picked up on the proposals of the Rochdale pioneers. Down here, a group of men got together and thought, well, actually, if we try this, it might work for us as well. Plymouth was enormously successful.
It was on Christmas Day 1859 at number 14 Tin Street, Bretonside, that Charles Goodenough and two close friends sat down for a seasonal drink and to discuss Plymouth's dreadful living conditions. Terrible sanitation, adulterated food, low life expectancy, overcrowding, low literacy levels and overwhelming poverty affected the working classes across the country and in cities in particular. Goodenough quoted passages from a favourite book, George Jacob Holyoake's Self-Help by the People, The History of the Rochdale Pioneers, an examination of the roots of the cooperative movement in the 1840s. Whatever was said that day was enough to inspire his like-minded friends to do something radical. This was the beginning of one of the country's biggest and most successful cooperative societies.
The co-op meant that people could trust the products that they were buying. They could trust the bread, they could trust the jam, they could trust everything about it because there were their own internal standards applied to everything. And that was an enormous boon, coupled with the fact that they weren't trying to exploit, so they were trying to keep their prices absolutely fair. So the co-op represented something that people had just never had up until that point in time.
The 1860s were inevitably a decade of firsts. The first shops, the start of the Education Committee, as well as new businesses like the supply of coal and the establishment of a bakery. Of course, the most important first was the chance for the people of Plymouth to buy unadulterated food at reasonable prices. They could also see a return on their investment, the cornerstone of cooperation, the dividend.
It was one of those things that made the co-op really, really attractive. Yes, it was good to get wholesome food and wholesome drinks, but it was even better when you thought that every quarter you could go and redeem your tokens or whatever and get stuff that was almost for free because you'd already spent that money and profited from it.
In the 1870s and 1880s, the Plymouth Cooperative flourished and became a powerful force for good in the city. Shops were opened in all of the three towns, Plymouth, Stonehouse and Devonport, and ventures into new businesses proved successful. Draperies and dairies were opened. Farms around the city purchased. More and more goods were delivered by horse-drawn vehicles, and what proved to be an ill-fated purchase of the Society's first schooner was completed. In 1886, the first Women's Guild was founded, and in 1894, the impressive and ornate central premises were opened in Frankfurt Street. The first decade of the 20th century saw Plymouth's cooperative society grow like never before. By 1901, Plymouth had become the 7th biggest cooperative in the country, and the following year delivered the highest dividend so far. New farms, stores and houses, a funeral business, stables, an abattoir, a restaurant, the first steam lorry, a flour mill, an employees' football team. There was hardly a corner of the city that wasn't touched by the growth of the organisation. These truly were the good times for Plymouth's cooperators.
The Jubilee in 1910 was celebrated in all sorts of ways. Traditionally, the Co-op would celebrate anything with an enormous procession of their vehicles. It was a spectacle for everybody, and it wasn't like a Lord Mayor's Day, it was a Co-op day. During the First World War, because the Co-op adhered to its essential basic principles, there was no attempt to profiteer. They didn't look and say, oh, there's a bit of a shortage going on, we can make hay while the sun shines here. They'd started their holiday camps, and during the First World War period that was looked upon as a great thing for the Co-op, because most working men couldn't afford a decent holiday.
For the Co-operative in Plymouth, the interwar years brought mixed success. Trading was difficult initially, but picked up with consolidation and new ventures into furniture, travel and hairdressing. In 1931, Unity Park, the sports ground in Efford, opened. Storm clouds were gathering by the end of the 30s, and the outbreak of war was of little surprise to many.
During the Second World War, per head of population, there were more civilian casualties in Plymouth than any other city in England. Over 2,000 civilians lost their lives. Hundreds, thousands of buildings were lost. Co-op lost over 40 stores, but the Co-op had so many other places that they could operate out of that they were in a marvellous position. So they had a great advantage in some respects over a lot of their local competitors. The end of the war was a period of austerity, clearly, but it was also a time when there was a great deal of hope, because we were able to get Patrick Abercrombie, who was the great post-war town planner, involved in coming up with a plan for Plymouth. Plymouth started with this bold vision of what the future might look like.
The Abercrombie Plan of 1944 mapped out the future of post-war Plymouth, and as a major player in the city, the Co-operative made sure they had some input. But progress was slow and frustrating for many. Although new housing estates grew up on the edges of the city, from Erniesettle to Plymstock, the centre took longer to finish. In the meantime, changes were afoot in the business. Plimpton joined the Plymouth Society, and the latest shopping trend, self-service, was introduced. By 1946, 100 new vehicles serviced the new estates, delivering groceries, fruit and veg to often remote and isolated communities. The 1950s were, as usual for the Co-operative in Plymouth, a decade of change, reinvention and growth. In 1951, the new warehouse at North Quay was completed and serviced the community with its impressive fleet of mechanised vehicles. A year later, signalling the end of an era, the Co-operative's last horse-drawn grocery delivery was made. And in 1953, the first phase of the new central premises was opened.
In the 1960s, there was a great deal of pressure for mergers, and whilst Plymouth itself wasn't looking to merge with a larger society, there were a number of smaller societies around and about that slowly accepted the inevitable and moved in with Plymouth and made Plymouth bigger and stronger. In the 70s, they were determined that they should stay ahead of the times and up to date in every respect, whether that meant being computerised or whether it meant adopting the latest sales practices. In Plymouth, certainly, they were the first to introduce self-service, food halls, frozen goods, and in the 70s, they kept that going.
The 1980s and 90s was another period of ups and downs for the Co-operative in Plymouth. The organisation tried to compete with that new force in British retailing, the supermarkets, by opening big stores and buying others. With the arrival of a new chief executive, this expansion was reversed and more emphasis placed on a manageable, community-based approach.
What the Co-op found very quickly was that they actually had shops in the best areas. Historically, they'd always been there, and they started to expand on them and expand on the opening hours, and that was one of the big keys as well, because it became the Co-op late store. Happily nowadays, the Co-operative is working extremely well since the decision was taken last year, and quite rightly, to merge the Plymouth cooperative movement with the national cooperative movement. The Co-operative puts money back into education, it puts money back into the community, it puts money back into charitable organisations, and it looks after its customers at the point of sale as well. So it's a great organisation because there's still that dividend, there's still that potential. The more you spend, the more you get out. And because they're not shareholders taking money out just so that they can take money out, all the money that is raised by the co-op somehow either goes to making the co-op more efficient, or the customer experience better, or society's position better, because they're putting money back into the community.
Well, the best bit about being a member of any cooperative society is that you're part of a family. There's no doubt about that. You belong to a very good organisation. You feel very proud that the society and the movement in general has helped so many charities, so many organisations over the years, and I'm sure it will go on in the future. There's certainly no reason why it shouldn't.
The cooperative movement in its many guises has served Plymouth and the South West for 150 years. The ordinary man or woman in the street, member or not, has benefited from the passion and integrity of those early pioneers. What Charles Goodenough would make of the cooperative today, who knows? He would probably be amazed. He may even be surprised. One thing he surely would be is proud. Here's to another 150 years of cooperating in Plymouth. Happy birthday.
Happy birthday.